They told me I was too old to understand business. My own children laughed as I signed away the house I built with my own hands, the home where every memory of my wife and family lived. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just watched them smirk, thinking they had won. But deep inside, a fire had ignited, a plan that would make them regret underestimating me. They thought taking my home meant taking my life's worth. They were wrong, very, very wrong. What happened next changed everything. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The morning sun poured through the windows, hitting the polished wood floor of my living room, but I barely noticed. My own children were there, smiling too wide, eyes sharp with greed, hands hovering over the documents I was told to sign. "Grandpa, it'll be easier if you just trust us," my eldest said, voice syrupy sweet but dripping with something darker. My heart sank. I knew that tone, the one that meant I had no choice. The smell of their cologne, the coffee steaming in the mug one of them had set too close to the papers, even the faint scratch of their shoes against the hardwood. Everything screamed deceit. My hands shook, not from age, but from anger and disbelief. This was my home, my sanctuary, and they were taking it from me as if it was nothing. I glanced around at the furniture I'd polished for decades, at the photographs of birthdays, graduations, weddings, all the moments I had lived here, all the laughter and love this house had held. And now they wanted to erase it, erase me. I wanted to speak, to yell, to stop them. But I didn't. I signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like a betrayal, a weight pressing on my chest, but I kept my face calm. Inside, though, a fire had started. They thought they'd won. They didn't know that signing my home away wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Before I tell you what I did next, I need to ask you something. What would you do if your own children tricked you into signing away your home? Would you fight back or let it go? Comment below. I want to see your answers. And if you think I should make them pay for underestimating me, hit that like button. It tells me I'm not alone. Don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to share, it's a story they'll wish I never told. I grew up believing that a home isn't just a roof over your head. It's memories, laughter, quiet nights, a place where life itself lives in every corner. I worked my fingers to the bone to build this house, every brick, every nail, every coat of paint. It carried a piece of my soul. My wife, God rest her soul, would often say, "One day, this will be the place they'll come back to, no matter where life takes them." I believed her. I believed in family. When my children were young, I made sure they had everything I didn't. I didn't care about vacations or luxuries for myself. I cared that they had opportunities, that they had comfort, that they could reach for dreams I never got to touch. I remember standing in this very living room, watching them play, hearing their laughter echo against the walls I had built. Those moments were worth every ounce of sweat, every late night, every penny spent. But as the years passed, I began to notice changes. Subtle at first. The way they'd glance at things I cherished, the way they rolled their eyes when I offered advice, the way they whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. I chalked it up to growing up. After all, children test boundaries. But slowly, the whispers grew louder, the glances sharper, the smiles colder, and I began to see the truth. They weren't children anymore. They were calculating adults, and my home was the prize they wanted most. I remember the first time I felt the sting of betrayal. My eldest came to me with a business idea. It was supposed to be a joint investment, a way for us to grow our wealth together. I trusted him. I signed a few papers, thinking it was for our mutual benefit. By the end of the week, I realized he had tricked me into transferring a small piece of property I owned outright into a joint name. That small theft didn't just hurt financially. It cut into my pride, my trust, and the sense that my family was who I thought they were. Still, I kept my composure. I told myself it was a learning experience, that perhaps my children were ambitious, and ambition is not inherently bad. I watched quietly as they began to grow bolder, their demands increasing. They started asking questions about my savings, about other properties, about investments I had made long before they were adults. And I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They weren't asking for guidance or advice. They were looking for loopholes, ways to claim what was mine without earning it. The day they made me sign my house away, I felt a strange combination of fury and clarity. They came with smiles, with phrases like, "It'll be easier if you just let us handle it," and "You've worked hard enough, Grandpa. Let us take care of the rest." The words dripped with sweetness, but I smelled the rot underneath, the greed, the entitlement, the utter lack of respect. I remember looking at the walls, at the photos of my wife and children, at the furniture polished by my own hands. This wasn't just a house, it was everything we had built together, and they were trying to erase it. Signing that paper was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My hands shook, not just from age, but from the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But even in that moment of despair, I felt something else flicker, a seed of resolve. If they thought taking my home meant they had won, they were wrong, very wrong. That paper didn't mark the end. It marked the beginning of a plan they'd never see coming. In the evenings after they left, I'd sit in my study, staring at the fireplace, the scent of burning wood bringing memories of quiet nights with my wife. I thought of all the times I had sacrificed, of all the lessons I had tried to teach them about honor and integrity. And I realized that I had one final lesson to teach, one they would never forget. The fire inside me burned hotter than ever, fueled by betrayal, but also by love for the life I had built, and the principle that family, no matter how misguided, should not be allowed to trample what is sacred. I started to plan. I observed them, quietly, noting every habit, every weakness, every ambition. I listened to their conversations, watched their reactions, and waited. Patience became my weapon, and cunning my shield. Every interaction, every subtle word, was a test of their greed and naivety. They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I was learning. And most importantly, they didn't know that the day they made me sign my house away was the day they had unknowingly signed their own downfall. Because I had learned something they hadn't. Age can slow the body, but it sharpens the mind. Experience becomes a weapon, and patience is a trap. And so, quietly, I waited. After they took my house, I should have felt defeated. I should have wallowed in despair, counting my losses. But instead, I became a shadow in my own home, quietly observing, quietly planning. I watched them move in, rearranging the furniture as if they'd always belonged there, as if my decades of memories meant nothing. Every laugh, every careless stomp on my polished floors, every smirk directed at me cut deep. But each wound also fueled my resolve. They weren't subtle either. My eldest began making calls in the study late at night, boasting to friends about the smartest move he'd ever made. My daughter bragged about selling some of my antiques without asking, claiming she needed the cash for investments. They didn't just disrespect me. They trampled everything I had built, as though my presence was nothing more than a nuisance. The audacity made my blood boil, but it also gave me something they could never take: insight. I learned quickly that greed makes people careless. Then came the first real complication. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing over a potential business expansion. I didn't need to listen in for long. Their plan was haphazard, risky, and entirely dependent on exploiting someone else's money. Mine. And as they argued, their arrogance shone through. They assumed I was powerless, that my age made me irrelevant, that my consent to sign away my home meant silence. But I wasn't silent. I was invisible. I started setting small traps, subtle tests to gauge how far they'd go. I mentioned old investments they knew nothing about, hinted at properties they assumed I had forgotten, and watched as their eyes lit up with lust and excitement. They began to overreach, leaving themselves exposed. Every misstep, every greedy glance, every careless word became fuel for the plan I was forming. The neighbors noticed the tension too. Mr. Patel, who had watched me raise my children, stopped by one evening. "They're bold, aren't they?" he said, eyes narrowing. I only nodded, giving him a small smile. He didn't know the half of it. He thought I was beaten. But patience, I reminded myself, was the deadliest weapon of all, and I had it in abundance. Yet even with my observations, complications arose. My children, thinking themselves clever, began involving others, lawyers, financial advisors, friends who supposedly knew better. Each meeting, each signed document, was another chance for them to dig themselves deeper. But I had to be careful. I couldn't strike too soon, couldn't let them suspect that their victory was temporary. One wrong move, one misstep, and my plan would crumble. Timing was everything. Then came the moment that truly tested me. My daughter suggested selling the property I had so painstakingly maintained, claiming the market was hot and we could double our money. I sat in the room, heart pounding, listening as they debated the details, as if my presence was irrelevant. I had to keep calm, pretend to be the frail old man they thought I was, all while every fiber of my being screamed for action. I swallowed my anger, masked my disgust, and let them speak. Each word they said, each plan they laid, was a trap they walked into willingly. Even more insidious, they began questioning my decisions openly, laughing at my old-fashioned methods. My daughter mocked the way I managed bills. My son sneered at my conservative investments. The disrespect was constant, relentless. And yet each insult was a stepping stone for me, a clue about their greed and overconfidence. I began to map out every weakness, their need for recognition, their impatience, their arrogance. Everything they lacked became part of the blueprint for the revenge they didn't even know was coming. By the time they thought they were comfortable, I had gathered all the pieces I needed. I had watched, waited, and collected information without their suspicion. Every careless boast, every overconfident action, every hint of impatience, it was all catalogued. And in that silence, I felt something powerful: control. They believed they had it, but I was the one pulling the strings. The rising tension, the complications, the betrayals, all of it was leading to one moment, one plan, one payoff that would make them wish they had never underestimated me. And just as I began to see the outline of my revenge taking shape, one thought haunted me. They were still my children. Would my actions break them completely? Or would they finally learn the lesson they so desperately needed? I didn't know yet. But I did know one thing. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would stop me from reclaiming what they stole and making them pay, not just for the house, but for every insult, every theft, every moment of disrespect. I had all the information I needed, and now it was time to set the trap. But revenge is not about anger. It's about precision. Every move had to be calculated, every step hidden from their greedy eyes. They thought they had won, that their signatures on my home papers were the final word. They had no idea the house they thought they owned was just the beginning of what they were about to lose. I started small. I called in favors from old friends I had helped over the years, lawyers, accountants, and even a few retired business partners who owed me nothing but respect. Quietly, I began laying the groundwork for a fake business opportunity. The concept was simple: something ambitious, lucrative, and entirely believable, but requiring full cooperation and legal commitment. I needed my children to believe it was real, and they did. Greed makes people blind. Every conversation, every email, every subtle mention of potential profits was designed to feed their ambition. I let them believe they were making all the decisions, while I guided them with invisible hands. I crafted contracts that seemed ordinary, routine, even generous. But beneath the surface, the clauses were binding, ironclad, and designed to shift control directly into my hands once they signed. Each sentence, each word, was a thread in the web I was weaving. I also had to ensure they were fully invested, emotionally and financially. I encouraged them to sell a few of their own minor assets, to borrow against investments, to commit resources they couldn't afford to lose. Every step they took drew them deeper into the trap. Their confidence grew, their arrogance soared, and the more they flaunted it, the more obvious their weaknesses became. I watched, quietly sipping my tea, noting every misstep, every boast, every careless smile. I remember one evening, as they argued over the best strategy for this opportunity, I let them overhear a conversation I didn't actually have. A call with a supposed investor. I made sure to drop hints of unlimited potential and exclusive rights, knowing they would pounce on the idea. My daughter practically bounced with excitement. My son rubbed his hands together like a child seeing candy. They had fallen exactly where I wanted them. Yet, even with the trap set, I had to be careful. I couldn't let suspicion creep into their minds. I acted as the concerned, frail grandfather, commenting gently, asking naive questions, making sure they believed I was out of the loop. "Are you sure this is safe?" I'd ask, and they would roll their eyes, laughing at my old-fashioned caution. But each laugh, each scoff, was a confirmation. They were mine to guide, mine to trap, and soon, mine to humble. I also prepared contingencies. What if they consulted a lawyer of their own? What if they suspected trickery? I had hidden clauses pre-approved by my trusted contacts, timed perfectly so they would activate only when the contract was fully executed. I had layers of insurance, financial, legal, and even social. Nothing could undo what was about to happen once the first signature was placed. By the time I invited them to the final meeting, the signing of the business contract that would seal their fate, they were practically vibrating with excitement. They didn't know it, but every step they had taken up to this point, every boast, every act of disrespect, had led them right into my hands. Their own confidence was the key to their downfall. The night before the meeting, I walked through my old home, now fully theirs on paper. I touched the door frames, the windows, the walls that had witnessed decades of life. I smiled quietly, knowing that the very place they had believed they stole from me would be the stage of their undoing. Every photograph, every memory, every object was part of the story I had written, and soon they would realize they had only signed themselves into it. I slept little that night, excitement mingling with a strange satisfaction. This was not vengeance for the sake of cruelty. It was a lesson, an exposure of greed and disrespect. I wasn't destroying them out of hate. I was showing them the consequences of thinking a house, or even a family, could be taken lightly. By morning, everything would be in motion, and I would watch patiently as the web tightened around them, as they unknowingly surrendered control of the very assets they had sought to claim from me. When they arrived, smiling, confident, and oblivious, I welcomed them warmly. They expected celebration, perhaps some guidance, maybe even my blessing. Instead, they stepped into the culmination of months of patience, observation, and careful orchestration. Every contract on the table, every clause, every seemingly innocent signature was a step closer to their reckoning. And I, the quiet old man they had underestimated, held the pen in my hands. The pen that would turn their ambition into their undoing. The day had arrived. I watched them enter the office I had set up in what they thought was my investment consultant's space. Their smiles were wide, their confidence palpable. They believed they were here to sign the next big deal, a deal that would multiply their fortunes tenfold. They had no idea they were about to sign away everything, the very things they had stolen from me and more. I sat quietly at the head of the table, feigning fatigue, letting my cane rest against my chair as though my age made me harmless. My daughter leaned over the paperwork, scanning clauses with a greedy grin, already imagining the profits. My son drummed his fingers on the polished table, too impatient to notice the subtle changes I had introduced into the contracts, clauses that would transfer control of their assets to me once executed. Every minor detail had been double-checked by my trusted lawyers. Everything was airtight. "Everything looks in order," my daughter said, her voice dripping with excitement. "Just sign, and we're officially partners." I nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Of course, I said. I trust your judgment completely. I'm just an old man. What do I know? My words were bait, and they swallowed them greedily. The signing began. One by one, they placed their pens on the dotted lines, never pausing to question the subtle stipulations that would soon bind them. As my son signed the final page, I felt a quiet satisfaction, the culmination of months of observation, patience, and precise planning. It was almost beautiful, watching their own ambition, their arrogance, carry them straight into the trap I had set. And then came the moment of revelation. My lawyer, sitting quietly in the corner until now, cleared his throat. I should remind you, he said calmly, that these agreements contain immediate clauses giving legal control over specified assets to Mr. Singh. My children froze, confusion and panic flashing across their faces. Assets? My daughter stammered. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair, letting a slow smile spread across my face. Do you remember how you tricked me into signing away my home? I asked, voice low, measured. You thought that was clever. You thought it was the final word, but it wasn't. You see, I've been preparing for this day for months. Every document, every signature, every boast you made has been a step toward this moment. The panic set in fast. My daughter's hands trembled as she clutched the papers. My son's confident demeanor crumbled. No, this can't be real, he said. You can't. Oh, it's real, I interrupted, my voice steady, almost serene. You signed legally binding contracts that transfer ownership and control of certain assets directly to me, assets that you believed were yours to exploit. I suggest you read the fine print carefully. It's all there. Everything you wanted, everything you coveted, gone. I watched as the realization dawned on them. They tried to argue, to deny, to claim they were misled, but the contracts were airtight. Their own greed had blinded them, made them careless, and I had exploited every weakness. The legal team confirmed each clause with calm authority, leaving no room for dispute. Their expressions shifted from shock to desperation, then to horror. My daughter dropped into her chair, head in hands, as if the weight of their mistakes had physically crushed her. My son paced the room, muttering curses under his breath, finally slumping against the wall in defeat. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the ultimate price. But I wasn't cruel beyond reason. I had ensured that while they lost control, they remained unharmed. The lesson was clear. Greed and deceit carry consequences. I had reclaimed not only what was mine, but also imposed a balance, a reckoning for their arrogance. And yet, there was a subtle irony I could not resist pointing out. Do you remember how you laughed at me, thinking I was too old to understand business, too weak to act? I said quietly. Well, who's laughing now? Hours passed as the paperwork was finalized. Every signature they had made that day cemented the reversal of fortune. They attempted to negotiate, to beg, to manipulate, but nothing could undo what they had already done to themselves. I had played the long game. Their impatience and disrespect had made them predictable, manageable, and ultimately vulnerable. When it was finally over, silence fell over the room. I stood, cane in hand, and looked at them, not with hate, but with quiet satisfaction. I hope this teaches you something, I said. That respect is earned, that deceit and greed carry consequences, and that you should never underestimate those you think are powerless. They said nothing. They couldn't. The reality of their own recklessness was a cage they could not escape. I had been patient, careful, and deliberate. And now, the power that had been stolen from me had been returned tenfold, not with violence, but with precision, cunning, and the undeniable truth of justice. As I walked out of that room, I felt a strange lightness. The weight of their betrayal, the sting of their disrespect, had lifted. They would remember this day forever, the day they realized that underestimating me, their father and grandfather, had been their gravest mistake. And though they had lost much, I had gained something far more satisfying: the certainty that justice, when executed with patience and precision, is far sweeter than revenge born of anger alone. Days passed, and the dust finally settled. My children were left to confront the consequences of their choices, and I returned to my quiet life. No fanfare, no celebration, just a sense of justice fulfilled. The house, now legally mine once more, felt lighter, not because of its walls, but because of the lesson it carried. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their own actions had taught them everything they needed to know. And I walked through my home, touched the familiar door frames, breathed in the memories, and smiled quietly. Patience, planning, and a steady hand had restored what was mine and humbled those who thought themselves clever. Sometimes revenge isn't about anger or cruelty, it's about balance. And as I looked out the window, I knew one thing for certain. Never underestimate an old man who still remembers, who still plans, and who still wins.